Yeah. Run.
Gotta be loud on that.
Good evening and welcome to the April 6th, the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission. For those of you viewing the meeting remotely, find the meeting agenda on the Planning Department website at accgov.com/planning. For those of you attending in person, on the table by the door, you will find a sign-in sheet and copies of tonight's agenda. For each agenda item, we will begin with a report from ACC planning staff. This is followed by a presentation by the applicant, not to exceed 10 minutes. We will then hear from members of the public. 3 minutes are allowed for any member of the public who wishes to address the commission. When addressing the commission, please provide your name, address, and the nature of your interest in the project, and direct your comments to the planning commission and not to the applicants. The audience is instructed to refrain from applauding or jeering the speaker. Exhibits may be displayed by the applicants or members of the public at the podium. Written correspondence received by noon yesterday has been forwarded to the planning commission and is part of the public record. Any additional written materials to be placed into the record must be read during public comment within the 3-minute time limit. For all speakers, please pay attention to the timing device near the podium. The device will display a yellow warning light when you have 30 seconds left and a red light when your time is up. After the public comment period, the applicant or their representative may request a 2-minute response. After that, the applicant will take their seat in the audience. At this point, the public portion of the agenda item is closed and the Planning Commission will proceed to discuss the item. We will receive no additional public or applicant comments unless requested by a Planning Commissioner. Finally, please note that the microphones in this room are sensitive, that the meeting is being broadcast live and recorded. Please turn off or silence your cell phones. The first item on the agenda under general business is introduction of staff reports and all other documents submitted to the Planning Commission.
So move. Second. Aye.
Item 2 is approval of the March 2nd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Brad, is there any reports?
Just, we have, within the last 30 days, gone under contract with our consultant that will be helping us prepare the 2050 transportation plan for the Main Course region. RS&H out of the Savannah and Atlanta offices will be heading it up. They're the same consultant that did our 2045 plan 5 years ago. So you will be hearing more of that. I'm sure they will be here at some point to get input, but just to let you know that process has started and it is scheduled for completion in October of 24. So that's all I have.
Under old business, item 1 is the 23 comprehensive plan 5-year update.
Good evening, commissioners. Big news on the comp plan is that it's ready for adoption. You've seen it a couple times now in various draft forms. Multiple folks from the Plan Commission were on the steering committee, and we appreciate your efforts through multiple meetings to help us get this document to the point where it's now ready to be adopted. Y'all have heard this before, but for the sake of our audience, the choice was made due to a variety of factors to take our 2023 plan and just make it an update of the 2018 comprehensive plan. So the DNA of the 2023 plan is very much based on the 2018 plan, to the point where we've basically just updated some language, we've updated data, we've added some materials to comply with new state requirements that have come through since 2018. And so if it looks familiar, that's because it is. We're now at the point where the state and the regional commission have reviewed it. They have given us the green light to approve it. We have heard, and so the ask tonight is that you would recommend approval and send it forward to the mayor and commission. We know that we've heard through the process from the steering committee that there are some dissatisfactions with how the plan is arranged. We hear those dissatisfactions, we share them in some ways, and we are ready to take those Tonight, we want to move to get this adopted so that we can comply with our state standards and stay in compliance with them. But we hear you, and we want to use this as a pivot point to launch into our growth concept update, our future land use update, all of these big picture planning items that ideally would be part of this 2023 plan, but we were not able to incorporate them this time around. And so in the next few months, you should be hearing and be ready to get involved with tackling the big picture update that everybody is itching to get to. So that concludes the staff report on the comp plan, and the recommendation is to approve and recommend approval for adoption.
Do we just discuss that behind the rail or?
No, you take public comment and then bring it behind the rail like any other. Yes.
This time we'll take public comment. Is anyone here to comment on the 2023 comp plan update? Seeing none.
First of all, I would like to thank the members of the steering committee, who are mostly members of the planning commission, but always also Grant Whitworth and Commissioner Patrick Davenport for putting this thing together. As I was telling Joey, I said it's a lot prettier than they used to be, but also I think it's a lot more readable than it was in the past. And I would like to go ahead and make a motion to approve it and send it forward to the mayor commission.
I'll second.
Discussion. Motion. We do a roll call.
I think you just.
All in favor?
Aye.
Brings us to item 2 under old business, 505 and 515 Drive. Number PDD-2022-10-03839.
Good evening. This is the staff report for the Olympic Drive proposal. The applicant has requested a rezoning from EI and I with conditions, that is employment, industrial, and industrial zoning with conditions, to mixed density residential in the form of planned development. This would also require a corresponding change to the future land use map from employment center to mixed density residential. The proposal itself is 254 attached townhome units, townhouse style multifamily, 762 bedrooms. Some noted features of the site are a large amenity area, stormwater basins. It would have gated access, and the garages are universally front loaded. I would also note that a virtually identical request was recommended for denial by this body in July of 2022. And that this application was tabled at the request of the Planning Commission in their January meeting. This is the aerial of the site. You can see it is all wooded. You can't really see it here, but there are a number of creeks and their associated riparian areas that cover the site. The loop is the main road that you see cutting through the picture, and then Olympic Drive is here towards the bottom. As you can see, it's not a very developed area. This is the gateway to our Athena Industrial Park. And then if you were to go inside the loop, you would go down towards Peter Street, and you can see the park there on the other side of the loop. Our future land use in this area is set up to facilitate the construction of industrial users and industrial facilities. That's why it's designated for employment center. On the left, the applicant has requested to change it to mixed density residential, which we don't have on this side of the loop. The only area around here that has that is on the other side of the loop, right about here. So this would create an isolated future land use, and it would change the character of this industrial area as we've designated according to the future land use. Similarly, we don't have any residential zoning adjacent to this parcel. So going from EI and I to RM1 with a PD is the applicant's request. This would also create an isolated zoning district, which we are not in practice of recommending approval on. You can see I and G as you move up, and there's also some EI zone around there as well as a rail line. This is an overview of the site plan. You can see the streams are the blue areas. They're associated stream buffers, riparian areas, and then it's basically the same product the whole way through, the same design, just townhouses there with two entrances on Olympic on the right here, and then it backs up to the railroad over here on the left, and then on the bottom is where the loop is. This is another, it's hard to see here, but this was kind of showing the tree canopy. We can move on from that. You should have a copy of that. Here's a better colored rendition of what that would look like. At the top, you can see this is what their kind of amenity area along with the pool over here. This is a rendering of what these townhouse style multifamily units would look like. All front loaded. Here's the architectural illustration there. Next slide, please. Our staff recommendation here is that it's very inconsistent with the future land use map. It's very inconsistent with the zoning map, and it's inconsistent with our 2018 comp plan, which I'll get to in a minute. It also creates isolated future land use and zoning districts in an area that we had never anticipated being residential. And to that effect, it is very automobile dependent. It's not a nodal development that's close to daily destinations or transit, doesn't have a lot of multimodal access. And so folks here would kind of be stranded in a certain way without a car. It doesn't really tie into what our comprehensive plan calls for, which is infill development, nodes, supportive services close by in terms of commercial and institutional, schools, workplaces, those kinds of things. It is very much envisioned to be part of our industrial area. Economic development has expressed concerns because introducing a residential use in the industrial park creates significant barriers for their industrial recruitment efforts, which also includes quality job creation, and it could potentially use some of the utility capacity there that is needed for future industrial projects. Industry not only does not want to locate next to a residential project, sometimes they don't even want to be located within a mile of a residential project. So they'll just draw a mile buffer around their site. And if there's residential there, they'll cross off that site. So it's not just what goes in next door. It could threaten much of the Olympic Drive area as far as crossing it off for industrial recruitment. It's also adjacent to what has been recently purchased by Athens-Clarke County, some industrial land that they've purchased, or that we have purchased, I guess. And that is at least planned partially for a water and sewer facility, another facility that's probably not the best of neighbors for a residential project. So with all that in mind, we are recommending a future land use denial and a zoning denial. That concludes the staff.
Now we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, David Ellison on behalf of the applicant. And I believe the commission is familiar with this project. We've appeared before it on several occasions. But one thing that has changed is, as staff has noted, is that the unified government has now purchased the property right here. Okay, so that's going to be a government use, and here's our property, and here's the post office right here. So there's going to be around 100 acres of a government use that will be a buffer between our multifamily development and the industrial and employment uses further up towards Athena Drive. And we think that this is going to provide a nice transition of uses between the industrial and employment uses up Athena Drive towards the government zone, towards RM, then ultimately into the single family south of Olympic Drive and on the other side of the loop. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so this site is currently zoned for employment industrial, and we do not believe that this site is feasible for industrial use. This was historically a RM zone until it was rezoned about 5 years ago to EI zoning designation. And one of the key problems is that there is a Trail Creek runs through the middle of this development. And then there's also a floodplain here. So that's one of the key challenges that is going to prohibit an industrial use from using this property. I mean, due to its location next to the loop, one would think that this would be an excellent location for industrial use, but it just simply hasn't happened due to these conditions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here's a copy of the contour of this parcel. So as you can see, there are a number of variations and some steep grade drops up and down this parcel. There are elevation changes between 60 feet throughout this parcel in very short areas. And so this really is the key problem as to why this cannot be used for an industrial use. If we go to the next slide, please. So there was suggestion that CSX is going to use this as a railroad spur, and that's just not going to be accurate. If you look at the topography of where the railroad track currently is, I mean, you can see that this is due to this topography, it is not going to be an adequate location for any kind of railroad spur. Can we go to the next slide, please? It's also due to the frontage. So due to the difficult site conditions and the minimal site frontage, other sites up and down this line may possibly be a spur, but this site is not going to be one. Can we go to the final slide? And so what we think this would be good for a multifamily use because we can incorporate these challenges into our site plan and essentially make them amenities. We have the stream through the middle of the property, and we have active and passive recreation areas around that incorporate what makes this difficult for an industrial use, really ideal for a multifamily use. We think RM would be appropriate in this circumstance because RM is intended to provide flexible residential zoning conditions, and we think that fits this scenario right here. We think this advances several important goals of the comprehensive plan. This is near the commercial nodes located at the new highway, all the commercial development on US Highway 29. That's a very short drive away. We think this achieves an important goal of providing additional housing inventory for Athens-Clarke County. And we don't believe this is going to negatively impact the prospect of industrial uses towards Athena Park. As noted, this used to be zoned multifamily a number of years ago, and that did not deter investment along Athena Park back then, and we don't think it's going to deter investment now. We also believe that the county that RM is shown to work next to employment and industrial uses in the county. There are a number of areas around Jimmy Daniel Road and Commerce Boulevard. So we think that this can work and it has worked. And I know the property next door is going to have, the county is going to be using that to replace the property on Pound Street. And Pound Street's right next to single family residential. So we think this can work. We think that there is adequate buffering, and we think this does achieve the important goal of providing more housing for Athens-Clarke County. We understand there's some concerns about traffic, but we believe most of the traffic is going to be going towards the loop. And we ultimately think this would be a good, desirable location for residents. It's right next to a park. All things considered, we request that you please take a fresh look at this proposal. We understand that there are legitimate concerns about industrial uses, but in light of the comprehensive plan, there's a more pressing need for housing than there is for industrial uses. So thank you all for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. So is there anyone else here to speak? Is there anyone here to speak against this proposal?
I have a question for the applicant. So I thought the topography, map that you showed was interesting. I guess I was just curious though, like when I look at this plan, everything is just like so beautiful and flat. But are there like grade changes within this? Like what's going to need to be done to achieve this on the lot as it currently is?
But you're talking about the current conditions or the as-built?
Well, getting it from current to as-built.
So if we can go to the site plan. That's, I believe, on the staff. First one. That one. So you can see basically underneath on the topography, where this is the current conditions, that ultimately we're going to be able to, grade it out to be able to accommodate these houses, while also we accommodate all the stormwater runoff as well.
I mean, basically the whole section with the apartments is all with townhouses is just, it's all gonna be graded. The whole thing's gonna be flattened out.
Yeah, a grading plan has not been developed, but there's going to be some grading. And we've already run this through preliminary concept review with stormwater management, and it should be sufficient to manage all the runoff.
Right, I was just curious about the process, so thank you.
Sure.
I do not feel like I should support, as someone who lives a few blocks away from the bus depot on Pound Street, I could not support residential in this current configuration. I would like to propose, make a motion for denial.
Future land use first.
For future land use, yes.
I'll second that.
Any discussion of that motion?
I've got a question, just clarity. And I believe the applicant brought this up. I think you said it was RM of recent, of 5 years ago or so? No?
But part of this was RM way back, probably in the nineties, coming into the 2000s. It was a mix of RM2, I believe, back then, and employment office. It was rezoned into a PD in 05 from EO and RM to EO and RM PD. And then 10 years ago is when the property was purchased actually by the contractor that was doing the road work on the overpass, primarily for the purpose of stockpiling the dirt that was going to come off of that project and not have to carry it away. And so they came back in and put the industrial zoning back on the property. And that's why when you look at it in the aerials, there's clearly, or if you drive by it, there are clearly areas that have been graded in the past 7 or 8 years, largely grading in order to place the dirt on. But that was about 10 years ago, Joey, that happened.
Because I guess my question, looking at this property and understanding the industrial use further out, but seeing the water running through, I would question why, if the county or if somebody with economic development is pushing this property, and why we haven't seen someone come in and really look at it. To me, it looks like the best use is a residential use. I understand the location and the industrial, but I also understand industrial plants stay far away from water and want to make sure they're not impeding on any of that. So I can't fully support a denial, but because I do have questions about the best and highest use for the property, and it appears this is a best and high use of it.
Any other?
So to make some similar comments to last time, but I can't help but see this is designed to be completely car dependent. From the lack of connectivity to even to the park, which is so close, to the style of the frontages, it's going to feel like a parking lot. Every house is going to be fronted by garages. So I think that's counter, as Steph pointed out, to a lot of the neighborhood design principles in our comp plan, as well as consistent with the surrounding land uses. What else? That's all I have to say right now.
Sarah.
Yes, I hear and understand what the applicant is saying about employment industrial not necessarily being the highest and best use of this land or even a possible use of this land. But believing that employment industrial is not the best use doesn't mean I also agree that mixed density residential is the best use when we have other uses like traditional neighborhood, which are surrounding this area. Also, just to go back to what Katie said, and while it is fresh off what you said, I found it interesting that the proximity of this parcel was described by the applicant as a short drive away from new development on Highway 29. I mean, we're in Athens. There's not much that isn't a short drive away. And I think that for the most part, when this body is looking at things being near other things, we are hoping to move away from always driving everywhere. And so this being for half the houses on this land, not even being within walking distance of the park, the one thing that is close to it, I mean, it'd be a 15 plus minute walk to get from the back half of this parcel to the entrance to Virginia Walker Park. The fact that it would take 10 minutes to drive to the B&B movie theater doesn't strike me as particularly in line with our comprehensive plan and everything else we've talked about. I also find it interesting that this, we're talking about this as one entire lot, but it appears to be two parcels, two addresses, the boundary of which is the stream. I think if I saw something where the back half of this was houses and the front half was any other use, I might feel differently about it. But with all of this together, 65 acres of housing in this location does not necessarily seem in line with what we need.
The other.
I think fundamentally, the staff, it's essentially the same staff report we heard almost a year ago. Nothing much has changed. And I'm with Katie and with Kristen that I just don't think this is an appropriate use for this piece of property. And it goes back 20 years ago or more when I heard it from the people who are doing commercial real estate. And they said, please, please, please do not change the zoning on your industrial tracts. They were adamant about that. And I've heard that for more than 20 years. So that's how I'm going to raise my support of the motion to.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add that I strongly believe that we need housing and lots of it. Athens, and I appreciate the applicant's efforts to project. I don't love the car dependence of this project, but in a different location, I could see supporting something like this. I just have the economic development concerns that were discussed in the staff report. And, housing near a park seems great. Housing near the loop is great for people getting to their jobs. It's not served by the bus. But it also may make it impossible to develop some of the other EI parcels in the industrial park. So I'm inclined to support the motion. Any other?
I'm gonna make a motion. Do we have to vote on the motion for future land use and then, or we can have a motion for zoning?
We've already got a motion.
Yeah.
For the future land use, I just
We
didn't
have
know.
to
if
vote
we
on
have-
that.
Stephen, can we do a roll call on that?
Yep, roll call on future land use, motion to deny the future land use change on Gary,
Yes.
Goodrum,
Yes.
Kinman,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Pass,
Yes.
Rowland,
Yes.
Tucker.
Yeah.
Motion passes 6-1.
I'll make a motion to deny the rezoning request.
I will second that.
Any discussion of that motion?
Call the roll again. Gary,
Yes.
Goodrum,
Yes.
Hinman,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Pass,
Yes.
Rowland,
Yes.
Tucker.
No.
Motion passes 6-1.
Agenda under old business is 286 and 396 Classic Road. Zone dash 2023 dash 01 dash 003.
The applicant is requesting a rezone from EI to RM2, which is employment industrial, to our residential mixed density level 2, which is a slightly higher density than the RM1 zone. This requires a corresponding future land use change from general business and employment center to mixed density residential. The proposal itself is for 86 3-bedroom townhouse style multifamily units, similar to what you just saw. 258 bedrooms. Some notable features of this project are a clubhouse with a green, stormwater basin, and then they have rear or in some cases front-loaded garages, depending on where they are on the site. This is an aerial of the site. You can see there's a handful of residential houses over there. Some of the area is cleared in the yard area and the rest of it is woods. And then it is next to a large undeveloped tract of land. And then Jennings Mill Parkway is the main road that you see cutting through the image. We'll be talking a lot about the future of Jennings Mill throughout this presentation. On the right, you see residential neighborhood on Classic Road here, single family subdivision. Next slide. The current area is split between employment center and general business as a future land use on the left. The applicant is requesting to change all of that to mixed density residential. You can see it stands out because we don't have anything adjacent to that shares that future land use. However, we have seen that future land use on some areas along Jennings Mill Parkway to the right of the image that you approved, for example, over at Mill Center a few months ago, last year. So the future land use is an important part of this consideration here. But as you can see, it would be a isolated district technically. Next slide. Same deal with the zoning. Again, we're taking this from EI to RM2 with and again, we don't have anything right next door adjacent to it that shares that zone. So we would be creating that isolated district. However, there's been some shifting of the uses along Jennings Mill towards more residential. So that sparks a conversation about what might be appropriate here. Next slide. So in light of the Jennings Mill conversation, we'll zoom out here. You can see Jennings Mill Parkway is right here. Atlanta Highway is the next big road cutting through the top. In the very top right corner, you can see the mall. Athens Church is right here on the at the edge of the photo there. Jennings Mill Parkway was originally built as a commercial and industrial alternative to Atlanta Highway. There was supposed to be a bridge that would cross the loop here. The Georgia Department of Transportation ultimately chose to construct that bridge over at the Oconee Connector and has no plans to build a bridge here anytime soon, if ever. And so the commercial and industrial vision for this site 20 plus years ago has never really materialized. We are left with some light industrial and commercial stuff here. And there's some commercial, as we all know, along Atlanta Highway. And so the area has kind of sat. And in the meantime, we've gotten a large residential project here. Large residential project here, And then we recently approved some residential stuff here as well, the Mill Center project. And so based on how the area has developed over the last 20 years, we think that it is appropriate to consider potentially changing the future land use of this area. Next slide. You can see the commercial, the general business here, the employment center is the purple, and then the yellow, which kind of flanks the ends of this parkway, is the residential stuff. So if the planning commission thinks that the future of this area is commercial residential, then it would make sense to potentially change the future land use here. If the planning commission thinks that the future of this site should remain commercial industrial, then we would recommend a denial of the future land use request. This is the site plan itself. You have Classic Road on the right, which leads into the subdivision that's next door. And then you have a new street that comes through here, makes a bit of an L, pops out on Jennings Mill Parkway at the top. Everything else on there is alleys. So we have a unique proposal here for an alley off of an alley. The center spike here is an alley off of an alley. That creates some fire access concerns, some traffic concerns. Typically, you would see an alley used as a secondary point of access, not the primary point of access. So you would have a street in front of your house and an alley in the back or off the side. So we typically don't see alleys used as basically substitutes for streets. And so we have some concerns there about access, both for fire and for traffic. And it's just maybe not the best use of a design tool like an alley. In the center, you see we have a green here with some amenity areas. We're going to zoom in on this in a moment because that whole area is going to be surrounded by a large retaining wall, which becomes another design issue that staff has concerns about in terms of, are you really creating a great area for people to enjoy if they have to look, based on the next slide, I believe, at a 16 or 17 foot retaining wall along the edge here. It slopes down to about 3 feet. So in the heart of the green, you're basically going to be in a bowl, staring straight up at anywhere from 8, 9, 10 feet walls on up to 17-foot walls. A 17-foot wall, just for comparison's sake, is roughly comparable to the wall that's at the corner of Barnett Shoals and Lexington, where the development sits way up in the air. From a design standpoint, that's not exactly conducive to creating a great space for people to hang out and enjoy themselves in, which is what the green is intended to do. So staff has some concerns there that that's not really a great design choice. And also, it's a lot of grading. It's not as much working with the land that's out there. We have some following slides with more retaining walls. This is on the left, the west side of the project, anywhere from 6 to 11 feet. This is the connection point that you will note we have a condition of in the staff report that we want to see this stubbed out. And instead, right now, it's an 8-foot all the way up to 12-foot retaining wall there, which would make that difficult to connect to at a future date when we think about developing the rest of that block that's currently undeveloped. Then the next slide shows some more retaining walls. These are at the back of one of the strips of townhomes there. So if you're looking out your window, somebody's looking out at something like an 8 to 13 foot retaining wall. Not the best view. And we think that perhaps on a site that needs so many retaining walls, could use a different design approach that is more conducive to working with the land and creating something that's more pleasant and enjoyable for the residents as a neighborhood. These are the proposed designs. The applicant is proposing to bind the site plan, but they are not binding themselves to these designs. So these are just for illustration purposes. We have on the previous slide, we had what would be the rear loaded townhomes. Top slide here shows what would be the front loaded ones that have garages in the front. The ones with alleys in the back would have garage access off the alley. So if the staff report notes a couple of things here. You have the big picture land use question, which we've seen this site. It's our third or fourth time seeing a site on this, a proposal here in the last 6 months or so. Changing it from its current land use to mixed density residential would trade the potential for job generation or housing. Our comp plan calls for both. Both are a priority there. So we'd be trading one for the other. We do think that mixed density residential on Jennings Mill is potentially compatible. Again, that whole discussion of if you think that this is a commercial industrial area, then mixed density residential needs to not be here. If you think that this is a commercial residential area, then maybe that's appropriate. However, some things have come to light that would preclude the land use discussion here. We have the tree management plan does not meet code. More importantly, we don't have sufficient fire access on these alley served units. We would need to see something more like the streets rather than alleys to provide sufficient fire and safety and transportation access to those units. So that's of significant concern. And then finally, the biggest issue here, the biggest issue is that the sewer line that would serve this project is nearing its total capacity limit. And so approving this project could eat up that capacity and limit or prevent by right development throughout the rest of the basin, which includes arguably our best remaining industrial tract out by Caterpillar that we could market to a future industrial user. So the main issue here is the sewer and then the fire access and then these various design concerns. And those things would need to be resolved before we get to big picture choice of land use in this part of town. And so for those reasons, we are recommending a denial of both the future land use and the reason. Oh, sorry, I forgot. That said, you are a recommending body. And so you can recommend, contrary to what the staff has recommended. We do have some suggestions. If you chose to recommend approval, we have 5 conditions here. One, we would suggest removing the binding aspect of the proposal. That's just the site plan in this case. We would also recommend a condition that requires a stub to build it to connect to the property line so that when future development occurs on these surrounding properties, we have the makings of a street network there. We would also recommend requiring that the retaining walls be terraced at no more than 4 feet tall. To correct the substandard parking spaces in some of these areas, they're not quite wide enough. And then to also widen out those alleys to create sufficient room for maneuvering. So this concludes the staff report.
We'll now hear from the applicant.
Hey, my name is Jeff Kuhn. I'm with Stratus Development Group, 2350 Prince Avenue here in Athens. Thanks for the time tonight. So this project, working title of Township, and true to form, this is a townhome community. Our goal here is to provide truly that missing middle housing solution that people talk about a lot, people request, but it isn't actually built that often. So a lot of times what we're seeing on our side is on the top end, you have luxury housing and prices and rents that can easily support development costs. And on the lower priced units, a lot of times you have government subsidies and grants that help to cover shortfalls. In the middle, there's nothing. And so there's a reason why this project hasn't been built that often. And we're trying to be a solution to that. This particular property, I believe you guys have seen a couple times in the past. 2 other groups have tried to do something here. And from my understanding, the support was there for the project, but they could not make it work financially, unfortunately. Our group, we've been working in Athens for nearly 20 years now. And we're not a volume group. We're not doing 12 projects a year. We might do 1. And we put all of our attention into that one project. This is no exception. We've taken a lot of time to look at variations of floor plans, exterior finishes, and architectural stylings, and really make this a quality product. The Jennings Mill corridor, as noted, has begun to transition to a more residential focus and use. There are several projects there that have been widely accepted and done very well, such as the cottages of Ridge Point right down the road. And also right behind this property is the Jennings Mill Corners. And I believe there's a representative from their neighborhood here tonight, and they can tell you that they do not want an EI property in front of their neighborhood. But the big picture on the rezone, EI allows for a variety of uses such as bottling plants, distribution centers, light manufacturing, hospitals, hotels. These are not conducive to having a neighborhood right behind. And furthermore, we have been working with the neighborhood on access, on sewer, which anyone will need to develop this tract. And if an EI user does want to come in and build here, the neighborhood's not going to want to work with them. There's a couple other notes on the staff report, and I'll let our engineer address most of those. But as far as the sewer capacity, if you look at something like a hospital or a bottling plant that's already allowed by right, we're talking about a down zone. This is not going from agricultural to something higher. This is taking it down. So this would be a lesser taxing use on the system than infrastructure. We did have a couple notes from the last meeting, most notably on the green space, and did want to note we did add a playground as requested in our previous meeting. And also we were trying to think of creative ways to really activate that green space, make it usable, make it engaging. And so we were thinking, and we will put a rental hobby and sport checkout area in the clubhouse. And that will be fully staffed, allow people to check out bocce ball sets and soccer balls and footballs and anything else to use that space. Also, that will not be, we do not plan on gating this community. We do not plan on fencing the green space. So it would be open to the surrounding neighborhoods as well. Before I leave it with Frank, yeah, overall, I really like this product. I think it's very much needed in Athens, and I stand by our work and our dedication to just delivering quality products and working with everybody to make sure we do something that's nice and needed and benefit for the community. Appreciate your time. Hope for your consideration. Turn this over to Frank. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. My name's Frank Pittman. I'm with Pittman Degree Engineering here locally. As Jeff mentioned, we came to you guys, I guess it was 2 months ago now, with a plan and got a lot of feedback. We felt like that we had addressed the comments from the previous staff report and the comments we heard from you guys. And then we got a new staff report at the end of last week with some new stuff that really hadn't been discussed before. And fair enough, but I wanted to kind of touch on some of those items, and Stephen mentioned those when he came up. Jeff mentioned the sewer. There's a comment about sewer not being available due to the need for easement. The neighboring subdivision has worked with us for us to be able to acquire the easement to physically get there. As Jeff mentioned, that would probably not be the case if this was tried to be developed as commercial industrial property. The subdivision would most likely not kind of play ball with those guys because they don't want it there. As far as capacity goes, this was something we heard this week that we didn't hear previously. And we recognize that there may be some issues. I've had some conversations with the utility department, and they're here tonight. It sounds like they are looking into these issues. I think that conversation is more of a permitting issue than a rezone issue, because as also was mentioned earlier, an industrial user could use significantly more sewer than residential. I did the plans on Caterpillar. They use 10 times what this project would use. So anybody with any kind of processed water is a significantly more sewer user than this. So I think that's more of a permitting issue. I have, as far as fire access, I had a good conversation with Fire Marshal this morning. It sounds like that, he would be satisfied if we widen these alleys a little bit, which I'm fine doing. We've got space to do that. So that's doesn't seem to be a real issue. Economic Development Department has noted that they do not think that successfully recruiting industrial to this property is likely. The discussion about retaining walls. So I want to make clear, because what was in the staff report really was not what's going on. Staff report says, and I met with planning yesterday and kind of cleared this up. Staff report says that the recreation area is up above the road, and that's not the case. It's down below the road. So the road's steep, and we're trying to create a flat area for recreation. We could not do the walls, and you'd have a steep recreation area that won't get used. So we're trying to create a community of open space, and the only way to do that is with walls. The walls do get tall once you get to the eastern end, but they taper down to nothing. But that area is on the same plane with the clubhouse and the pool and the playground. All that's on the same flat area. Nobody is looking out their unit at walls. The walls are all below the unit, so they go down, they don't go up. Same with the walls at the back. Tiering the walls. Yes, I guess if you're looking at the walls, it looks a little bit better. I would argue that does not increase safety, because now if you were to fall off a wall, you're falling onto a rail at a lower wall. And you're also creating a situation where kids climb up on 4-foot walls. They don't climb up on 10-foot walls. So I think if we had to do that, we could, but I don't think that's a better situation. And it takes more space that doesn't allow for more open space. The future interconnection, we've designed this to where if the property to the west became another phase of this or another residential development, it could physically be connected. We shy away from providing an interconnection easement right now for two reasons. Number one, the property is zoned industrial. And I don't think it's a good idea to have interconnection between residential and industrial property. And number two, it also allows the industrial property to go through this property through the single family subdivision that are working with us to give us access to roads and sewer. It's really not a fair thing to place on them when they don't have to give anybody access today. Staff did make a comment that Jennings Mill should become more residential, yet they recommended denial. So there's a little bit of, I don't really necessarily understand that. As far as the conditions that are recommended, removing the binding plan, we're obviously okay with it being a straight rezone. I mean, we offered up a binding plan so that everybody knows what you're getting. And we're fine with the binding plan. We're fine with it being a straight rezone. Talked about I've mentioned the stub to the west. I've talked about terracing the walls. The parking, correcting the parking. They're already shown as double width, and the note may be wrong on there, but they're shown. So we'll make that work and meet code. And then the alley backup space. So you're not required to have 24 foot of backup on it. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for your time.
You may ask.
Okay.
Back to the podium to answer questions. Is there anyone else in the room who is here to speak in favor of the?
Yes. And prior to speaking, can I get slide 2 from the prior PowerPoint up, please? Thank you. Of the one more down, maybe. That one. Yes, thank you. Good evening. David Ian. I represent Jennings Mill Corners HOA. I'm the president of the neighborhood. The neighborhood that's just to the right of this project. And I represent this neighborhood that has 120 homes in this subdivision. We are here to speak in support of this plan. I recognize some of you from, I believe it was last year, there was another plan that was actually proposed before y'all on this property. And I had spoken at that point in support of that plan, but that one did not end up going through. But I am back on behalf of the neighborhood to speak in supported this plan even more so than the prior one. This plan, when compared to the prior one, leaves more tree canopy. This one, it has less units. This one, frankly, we believe is even better than the prior one. But specifically, and really the biggest thing that the neighborhood would like to convey to this body is that our support and our position is mainly in support of the rezoning of this to residential. We have met numerous times as board. Our board's met numerous times. Our neighborhoods has several meetings. We've debated and discussed this topic. And what I would like to convey is there is no support for commercial, industrial being developed on this property. Myself and several of my neighbors live right along the neighboring area of where this backs up to. And I would just ask for you all to put yourself in someone like my shoes or my neighbor's shoes to go out to your backyard and to see something like a commercial or industrial developed on this property. It's something that we have looked at, we have considered, and I would just like the board or y'all to know that it's not something that we are in support of. We are in support of this being rezoned as residential. I understand from what I heard earlier, there's a lot of calculation and some thought about whether this corridor should be rethought and specifically this plan. What I would ask is for you to consider us in your calculation. As the two prior gentlemen noted, we as a neighborhood own a thin strip of property that actually neighbors this. So whatever development does go on here is ultimately going to have cooperation from the neighborhood if there's going to be development on this plan. And I can say it would be unlikely, very, very unlikely for there to be any support for anything other than residential. So I would ask that you consider us in your calculation and that you consider rezoning this as residential. Last thing that I would note, this is the second plan, at least that I know of, that's been in front of this body that's been residential. I don't know of any commercial one that's been on this or any of the other properties. Please consider that as well. Residential, I believe, is the way to go here. Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this? Is there anyone here to speak against this proposal? Okay, we will bring it behind the rail. Can we start by just asking the fire marshal and the utilities to step to the podium and speak to their concerns in a little more detail, Brad?
You certainly can, yes. I would, the utilities gentleman came in a little bit later. I did introduce Chief Scarborough and Alfonso Daniel with the fire department. They are here to answer any questions you have regarding the fire department concerns. Also, we have Hugh Ogle, John Holly, and Matt Adamson, who represent our utilities department. And they are here for the same reason to answer any of the questions you may have. All of us recognizing that the sewer restriction issue came a little late in the game, but that's why they've been good enough to be here with us tonight.
And we appreciate their being here. Could I just ask one or both, whichever member of the fire department?
I maybe ask a specific question that would bring them up.
Of course.
Yeah. I actually have a question about the water and sewer. So if we could start with that. Sorry. My question is, I'm curious. I guess maybe I should say, clearly there's a movement of more residential along this corridor. So I wanted to find out, as if this were to be rezoned, and then I feel like that sort of unlocks the other properties as dominoes start to fall, what does that do to the water and sewer capacity for this portion of the county?
Well, when the sewer was originally installed,
Can you come to the podium? Just so the camera. Thank you.
when the sewer was originally installed, it was installed with the basis of being industrial. So when you take the capacity evaluation that was done for this development, we've got it figured very, very high. If we have the capacity, but what it does is the domino effect like you're talking about. it's gonna take capacity away from future site developments. If you keep zoning residential, then the capacity keeps going away. And yes, there would be industrial users would have high usage as well, like Ms. Pittman addressed earlier, but they would go under the same capacity evaluations that this project went through.
What do you mean by capacity evaluations? Like,
That's good.
Yeah, I guess.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do a capacity evaluation for, especially for rezones, which basically we have a hydraulic model for our water and our sewer, where we can sort of predict the flows that would be required by a development, run it through our model and see what kind of effect it would have on our system. Typically with residential, it is a pretty demanding zoning. So it does have a pretty high use, which is why that domino effect is kind of something we wanted to bring to attention. With like employment, industrial, those are also heavy or can be heavy users. So we frequently have water and sewer capacity evaluations for those as well to make sure that if they are going to be a big user, we do have capacity available for them as well.
So if, say, this were an and I know like you can't just be like, this is the usage for this, but if it were an industrial use on this property, would it create like less capacity? I mean, would it create less, I guess, water going into the sewer system?
It's one of those things where it's kind of a case by case basis. So residential sort of, it's more commonly a heavy user. Industrial can be a heavy user. It can also be a pretty light user. It can have a lot of like recycled water, or it can, not really require a lot of water in their process.
So would it be fair to say then that based on all these being industrial, you have sort of a general baseline of like, here's the water usage. So when you start introducing residential into that, it starts tipping that balance. And so then it changes what would be accommodating across the rest of the usage. And if this were more residential, then that's going to change. So then let me go. So then as far as the total capacity for the water we can bring to this part of the county and the water we're treating from this part of the county, what is the status of that?
Are you talking about as far as like?
Can we increase it? Can we increase our capacity?
Like well, we're currently investigating. That's sort of part of this is we have some flow meters basically out in the sewer system to see where our troubled areas are, so we can do more investigating to see what needs to be done to increase capacity. But yes, we are looking at what we can do to kind of resolve that problem.
A follow-up question on that is, can you give us any insight into is the bottleneck, is it sort of a local Jennings Mill sewer main issue as opposed to like a treatment plant capacity?
It's, so there's a main interceptor that runs along McNutt Creek, just, the south of the county line. And it is a substantial portion of that where we're seeing possible issues. So our investigation is rather broad down there. It's a pretty large area.
We don't think it's a plant issue though. I think it's a line and capacity issue in the system.
Got it. Thank you.
You want to just hand out? Copy of that map so they'll be able to see the interceptor and see the property. Yeah, I can do that. Thank you.
You have a question for them?
Mine was for utilities, yes.
Okay, yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing is we're limiting what can be developed on that to something with a less utility use than a residential neighborhood. And is this something new that y'all are just starting to analyze for developments?
Yeah, it's well, I I've been with utilities for a couple years, so I don't know how far back this issue goes, but it's something that I've kind of newly discovered, I guess, when we were investigating developments in this area. It sort of surprised us that we were having issues down here in the McNutt area.
Because I asked that question, because this is, obviously you've heard, this is not the first time we've seen this, but yet this is the first time utilities has come with a concern, which wanted me to say, if you're not looking at it, why you all of a sudden did look at it today? And I guess looking at industrial now, basically, if we deny, the county has to go back and say anything that pulls water more than a residential neighborhood needs to be crossed out. Otherwise, we've done worse by putting something to pull more water here for the major tract that's further down the road that we're trying to protect. So you're trying to protect a capacity sense for a larger development down the road. So now we need to go back to this development and say nothing that pulls a certain amount of water could be ever put there if it pulls more than a residential neighborhood, or we've just approved something that we just did the same thing we're looking. I mean, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
To address that, this issue, we're addressing the whole McNutt Creek corridor.
Exactly.
So this is going from essentially Bogart all the way to our wastewater treatment facility. We're doing a very extensive study now to actually prevent what you're talking about happening. So, obviously you got to look at the size, the cost, and what would be involved in renewing, repairing. And that's what we're trying to get to, is where we need to focus that attention, revenue that it's going to have to take to make those repairs or replacements or realignment. There's a lot of wetland area. It's a gravity sewer main, so you're transversing the McNutt Creek corridor. So anytime it rains, like the 4-inch rain event we had a couple months ago, it affects that line. I intrusion from a rain event would affect that capacity issue as well. So there are things that we're working on to try to address that situation.
I have a question.
I think.
Oh, that's right, Katie, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were.
I remember exactly what it is. So you're saying it's newly come to your attention that there might be limitations in this area?
I mean, we got asked to do the capacity evaluation, and that's what brought it to our attention. If they, I don't know if there was a capacity request made when you looked at the previous pre-zone plan. It could have been, but I wasn't aware of it. I'm not aware of it. I don't know. We're going with the information that was requested for the capacity evaluation off of this site plan.
Okay, and I guess if you could address the applicant suggested that industrial uses might have a higher demand than this residential use. Can you guide us in evaluating that possibility?
We would evaluate it the same way. When we do the evaluation for the capacity, that's to say whether the line can take that flow. So if it's an industrial track, even if it's zone industrial, we couldn't approve letting that industrial user tie in if we don't have the line to support the flow. It would essentially dump out on the ground instead of flow the sewer main to the treatment facility.
And I think in fairness, the mention of the comparison of this being used for multifamily versus it could be used for a hospital or a bottling plant, or you got to look at the size of the property. I mean, it would be what could go on a 10-acre piece of employment industrial zone property. And so I think the comparison to what Caterpillar is doing on a tract their size is a little bit apples and oranges.
Lucy, and then Sarah.
Okay. I think we're kind of going off the rails a little bit on this. First of all, Jenningsville Parkway was considered industrial and employment as long as I can remember. But the other thing is we are looking at these as individual plats, lots. And there's a big difference between having 200 and some units and having 20 units. So I think just throwing out and saying residential is going to draw more water, need more water and sewer, that's sort of a huge generalization. And public utilities is aware of that a high density or a high capacity use is going to obviously make a different model, create a different model for each of these site plans. So I think we need to remember that if this were 20 units, it would be very different from having 200 units. So please don't try to overthink it, that Jennings Mill Parkway is going to be wall-to-wall, 200-unit residential until it uses up all the capacity. I think we've got to be more careful and more nuanced than that. That's just my observation.
So I have a question for our friends from Public Utilities. And I think that you sort of touched on this, and so maybe I'm just clarifying. Off of Katie's question, when Katie asked, if someone wants to build an industrial thing here, what if that would be a capacity concern? And I think that you said, basically, if someone, people have to go through a lot of permitting processes to build by right. And so my question is, if we were to approve this rezone, would there be other points down the line where Public Utilities would have an opportunity or a chance to weigh in and say, you can't build this here right now, regardless of what it's zoned as, because, we don't have the capacity, we're working on building capacity out here?
Yes, ma'am. If you rezone it or not, we would still, depending on what they ask for us to evaluate versus, 300 bedrooms versus 20 bedrooms, or an industrial user that's going to use processed water by the millions of gallons a day. We would evaluate those on case by case basis. And yes, we would turn that down if we do not have the capacity to take that load.
All right. So then I guess a follow-up to that is, why bring this comment at this stage where we're looking at determining zoning and land use versus bringing it to the individual permitting process for what would be built after the zoning and land use? What's the purpose of bringing this here now, or what did y'all hope to get into by bringing it up here?
We just wanted y'all to be aware of what was going on. Obviously, I mean, if you approve this and then another residential, you have to continue to rezone property. We will get to the point where we will not have the capacity. And we just want everyone to be aware of where utilities is at. And like I say, we got the capacity request, we performed that, and that's what brought that to our attention off of this site plan.
Thank you.
By the number of bedrooms.
Clear discussion.
Can I ask a question for Firefox?
Yeah.
So from the fire department perspective, I'll be honest, I think it's really interesting looking at the plans on a piece of paper and then learning about, because I need different classes. I did not realize that there were drops at like what was described. My question is kind of a 2-in-1 for you. With the issue with the alleys, it sounded like y'all came to a point where there's some agreement on widening the alleys and y'all will be okay with that. Is that correct?
Yes, I spoke to Mr. Pittman earlier this morning. Typical alleyways are not used for your direct access to your apartment. We want a road that's public street dimension. That allows us to get our emergency vehicles to that particular resident. Alleyways are used as a secondary. And alleyways, you're gonna have people parking there, you're gonna have trash there, it's gonna get clogged up. We wanna be able to get in and get around. So, and it doesn't meet the International Fire Code either. So that's why my comments came on that was that I couldn't approve that at that time. And speaking of Mr. Pittman, he said that he would widen the alleyways to a public street dimension, which would meet the International Fire Code. And also, if you look at the bottom of that photo there, he will put a turnaround, and that's required also by the International Code.
So the pitch points were at that bottom portion,
Yes.
and then at that T intersection in the middle?
Yes.
Okay.
And also on I think on top level, they're also alleyway dimension. We will also need that into a public street dimension.
Okay.
This is one reason why we're recommending taking the binding off the plate.
Yeah, for sure. Because related to that, once I realized that there was so much grade changes, like the, having like a 17-foot difference, like does that come into play with fire at all? Or is that just not really something that you all consider?
There's a 10% grade in a 5-lane, but in this incident, we're just looking for access to the residential.
Thank you.
There.
So a question I have about the alleys is, and I'll just talk about the like back alleys, not the really unusual kind of T-shaped guy. Do y'all have vehicles that can access those alleys if they are not improved?
My answer would have to say no. Yes, in a normal operation, your big red engine is what goes to the call, and it has to access it. We don't put a special vehicle out for a neighborhood because it has alleyways. The big red engine is coming, approximately about 5 of them per call.
On every call,
On every call.
regardless of the nature of the call?
If it's a potential structure fire, it's coming. That's our standard operating procedure.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Well, I guess I have a couple of comments. This may lead to one more question. I'm sorry if it does for utilities, but I've seen capacity evaluation letters in a number of applications over the years that say for a given proposed project, we do have the capacity for this, but we don't reserve capacity. And so we have it today, but until building permits are pulled, no promises are made. I take the utilities department's position on this to be, we do have capacity to serve this project now, but other projects could come along that would deplete the capacity and make it not possible to serve this, whether rezoned or not, if they were permitted first. And by the same token that if this were rezoned and permitted very quickly, then that may have implications with respect to development of other parcels down the road. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think the land use, I mean, we do land use here, and it strikes me that this project is the dream of industrial employment stuff on Jennings Mill has never materialized. We have comments in this report from the Economic Development Department saying that it is unlikely that a light industrial project would be developed on this parcel. And so they're willing to kiss it goodbye. They just say that they don't want the balance of land uses to be tilted too far away from employment industrial. But contrary to Lucy's mantra that we should leave our EI zoning alone, it sounds like economic development with respect to Jennings Mill is fine with it. And so I think it seems to me that housing is appropriate here, that the land use change is appropriate here, that the sewer capacity is there now, and that we are very much in need of housing. And so I think I'm generally inclined to support the proposal, subject to some conditions. I think staff made some really good observations about necessary conditions. So, yeah, I guess those are my principal comments. I guess I did want to ask staff if, Stephen, if you could just clarify the binding or not binding thing, the first condition that y'all had identified, if we were to go in that direction, is the idea there that the binding site plan means these alleys are what gets built. And so we need to make it not binding in order to accommodate the greater alley width? Or could we leave it binding so that we know what we're going to get, but just subject to the other conditions you mentioned about adequate width of the alleys? And
You would remove the binding so that they can meet all of these things. They can adjust street widths, trees, all that stuff. So you wouldn't selectively find it. So that's why that condition is there, so that they can now have the freedom to address all the other department comments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
I think there's enough moving pieces, if it's approved, that need to be moved. I mean, the alley widths are going to start to push everything out in a way. You know, our request, if this property goes RM2, it's very likely that you're going to see the one to the west of it next. You know, and they're going to ask for something similar. And that's part of our concern with the issue of utility infrastructure is that, you know, on an acre by acre basis, an RM2 zone property at full density generally and typically pulls more sewer. It's more of an impact than on an acre by acre basis of industrial land because they're normally much larger. So when the next big piece comes in and they ask for the same thing, then we've got to respond to it. But we're also, the other issue that we're asking for is for that road that comes in order to position ourselves when the next piece, whether it goes RM2 or whether it goes commercial neighborhood or whatever happens, that we feel like that should be a public street, not a public easement on a private driveway, but a public street that comes off of Classic Road and connects to the property line on the western side of this, so as to begin to build the road network. Or to make that a public street, you're starting to push there too. Now we're dealing with right of way and possible design issues in order to move that road slightly to meet vertical curvature for a public road. We're not sure, but that's kind of our position. We feel like there's enough things that are going to change that if you remove the binding on it, then it gives us flexibility to incorporate the rest of it.
Okay. I did hear one related to that, one comment from the neighborhood association, which I appreciated those comments. It sounded to me like they had a concern with the potential that if that public street were stubbed out to the western property line, the existing industrial parcel on the other side of that western property line could begin, you know, if it were developed EI, that there could be industrial traffic coming through there. Is there a way to accommodate the neighborhood's concerns about that, or your staff's thoughts on that?
It's industrial traffic. It probably goes straight to Jenningsville.
I wouldn't think, I wouldn't think you would use it. I mean, I think that's the other issue that we're dealing with on this one that makes it so difficult, and 100% get, you know, the position of the neighborhood next to it, that they don't want any commercial development around it. Fact of the matter is, the neighborhood's zoned commercial, and the 5 or 6 acre piece in front of where the houses are is zoned commercial, and so they are commercial as well. So it's what we're trying to position ourselves for if this happens is, you know, ideally, maybe the next piece is it's more of a neighborhood. Maybe it's a mixed use that has a commercial neighborhood scale component that we don't want the residents of any of these areas that live here to have to go out on the Jennings Mill and down and then go back in to get to a commercial service that's west of it. They should be able to access through by, you know, on foot, by car, by bike. But the only way to really assure that is to make it a public road with public connection.
Absolutely.
I think there was a slide in the staff report that had an aerial that kind of showed the greater area that included like Atlanta Highway. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I don't get to say I told you so very often in my job. But when that particular stretch of Jenningsville Parkway was developed, as Stephen pointed out, there was an anticipated flyover down at the eastern end of it. And I advocated really strongly when I was on the commission for not making that a 4-lane industrial style road, that it could be more like a parkway, could include separated bike lane. That obviously would be much more attractive for a residential area. So I just have to put that out there into the public record. Related to that, I do think that if that property to the west of the property under consideration were to develop commercial, it's hard to imagine that they would take a little residential street through a neighborhood rather than go out to Jenningsville, thanks to the great, beautiful 4-lane highway that we ended up building. It is suited for that kind of traffic. I guess the other comment that I want to make is, I think this has been a really useful conversation, especially having the folks from Public Utilities here. I am not comfortable rezoning by parcel. This is just goes against the grain of all kinds of good planning. So while I am open-minded to this development, just because I do think it makes sense here, and I agree with everybody in this room probably that this maybe should be zoned for residential development. I think that we've got to put our planning lights on it so that, I'm glad that Public Utilities was able to sort of flag this issue for us. Obviously, someone from planning made a request, can you do a capacity study? And they went, oh, yeah, I can see how this trend may cause problems literally down the road. So now, we have that in front of us, but moving forward, I think we've got to really take a close look at this particular corridor. I did want to point out one more thing. One of the reasons why the road itself, I was really excited about, is you can see how it starts to form a grid pattern with Atlanta Highway. So, there are the crossroads from Jennings Mill up to Atlanta Highway. So this is a very accessible part of the west side of the county, and I think is suited for residential development. But unless we say, in our planning documents, that's, for community input, that's what we want, then we're dependent on, say, Public Utilities to say, oh, the zoning trends here are kind of, these rezones are messing with our planning process, because we're planning for this and you're now permitting this kind of use. So I just want to say that's really kind of where my discomfort comes from, doing this kind of rezone by parcel, even though I think this one makes sense. So I'll stop talking now.
I'm thinking really along the exact same lines. And again, I kind of quote what Sarah Beresford said last time, reference it. So this would be a situation for, we know that the smart way to develop is compact mixed use. That's what pays the bills. That's what pays for infrastructure and services. And ideally, we would have all been on the same page way in advance with the future land use plan and the comp plan, where utilities were talking with economic development and planning, and we would all decide what is the best investment, where we should be investing in compact mixed-use development, especially housing density. And so this would be, if someone made that intentional decision, this could be a very interesting sprawl retrofit site, but it's nowhere near that right now, except that it has the bus line, the mall redevelopment, and yeah, the potential for a grid. But right now, it's not anywhere near a compact, walkable neighborhood. And I would love to see, a clear decision from all parties involved in the county about whether this is an appropriate place to actually build a real neighborhood, not just to keep adding pockets of housing. And I appreciate that staff has talked about at least keeping the possibility open for a well-designed neighborhood in the future. So that said, I'm still on the fence about whether this is appropriate for residential. I agree about the townhome products and price points, and I'd say the northern half of the development does that job of actually having the townhomes with front entrances that frame the public space and the right of way. Whereas the southern kind of alley units don't really. What else? Yeah, I just want to put a plug in for I guess a comprehensive land use plan that actually takes these considerations into account, so that we'll know way in advance whether we want to align our investments in sewer infrastructure and walkable transportation networks with housing density. The question is for a few more minutes.
Yeah, along those lines, and agreeing with everything that Katie and Alice said about how necessary it is that we have a plan that is updated. My question is, I guess, a general question first to planning staff. How far out do we think that that is? What is the timeline for us having an updated map?
Next summer.
Next summer? Okay.
That's within our special projects work program, we are scheduled to tentatively complete the land use map update along with growth concept in total by mid to late next summer. I mean, that may, depending on, there's always factors. I mean, community involvement is one of the really big ones. If we get a very, very robust process, it may push it a little longer to make sure we've received all that comment. But the target right now is June or July of 24 to be done.
And that's for the future land use update.
That's for the land use map update. Then that's why a lot of the missing middle work that you all initially started had been pushed to begin upon completion of the land use map update, which is next summer in our program.
Okay. And then I might be confused here. After the land use update, would we then look at a zoning update? Would there be like an overall zoning map update?
There's not an overall zoning map update on the books right now. I think the next step coming out of the land use map update, we're going to be in the summer of 24. It's time to start. If we're going to do a major overhaul of our comprehensive plan, we need to go at that point. And it's, so we would probably move directly into that, start to pick up some of the things that you all worked so hard on 2 or 3 years ago in terms of housing options, housing choices. There are some zoning modifications built into that, but not a comprehensive new zoning map. I think that would, if that's going to come, that's going to come out of the completion of the 28th comprehensive plan that may lead us to, which is the same thing we did 30 years ago. We came out in 1998 and then into a full rezoning of the county to address the needs of that 2000 comprehensive plan.
So there might be a period of some years there where the future land use map, there might be a lot of parcels out there that are zoned for something completely random from the future land use map.
Possible.
I mean, yeah, that's.
Then you go into a lot of type 2s instead of 1.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And thank you so much. And I really wanted to get that information for me and also out there. Because I think if the future land use update were, 4 or 5 years away, then one might look at something like this and say, we need a future land use comprehensive update, but we can't wait 5 years for the county to grow and change. So we might as well make these changes in the meantime. Whereas it feels a little bit different if it's next summer. Especially when we're looking at this from a public utilities perspective. And something that like a light bulb that just went off in my head that makes me very grateful that public utilities came forward today is that while they might be able to provide a comment today, and I'm sorry if this is something that everyone else already knows and I'm just late to the party, the comment that they provide today is informational in purpose. And I asked the question about, well, can you deny a permit at a later date? Our guy said, well, yeah, we could. But then I believe the permitting process is probably a lot, there's not discretion to deny at that point. Like that would be probably very easily challenged. And it's sort of a first to break ground race to develop at that point. Whereas now we can actually have the space to think a little bit more long-term.
And while there's not going to be a comprehensive rezoning coming out of the future land use map update, that's not to say that there may not be a few hot spots that come out of it that are just no-brainers when we look at them. That we've got the wrong zoning on this property. The government has the authority to bring forward private property for rezoning. Now, in those cases, we would absolutely work first with the property owners and hope they're on board with us. But, yeah, but to do a comprehensive rezoning in the county, that's not anticipated for some time.
Yeah, and that, and I am flip-flopping future land use and zoning in what I'm saying. I apologize. But I follow what you're saying.
I can promise you that these guys to my right and in front of me they're chomping at the bit to get going, so.
And just one more comment that I wanted to make, actually, I guess a question for the applicant about the recreation space and the walls and the topography. And first, just a nice comment. I like how you added the clubhouse components. I feel like y'all were really receptive to the comments you got last time, and that's much appreciated. Kind of put yourself in a double bind because we made a lot of comments last time. I think it was on this one about how wide the roads were and how weird that was. Or maybe it was something else in the same area. But of course, there's problems going too thin as well. And we asked for specific common space uses and you put them in there. So I understand the benefit of having a flat grass lawn open space if you're playing soccer. I'm curious if there's any reason, if there's any benefit to having the way that you've designed it here, other than for the usability of the flat space.
What do you mean by, is there any benefit?
I'm asking for like kind of a more complete explanation of why we're getting this.
While we're flattening that out, I mean,
Yeah.
because the thought is that the flatter that is, the more likely it's going to be used. And whether that's for soccer or throwing the football, throwing a frisbee, playing with your dogs or kids running, they're more likely to do that if it's a flatter area than if it's steep like this. And it's just, typically that's not going to get used. The outdoorsy people that like to climb hills be all over that. But families so much would not use it that way, is the feeling.
Yeah.
So that's the purpose of it. I mean, they could go away and it could follow the slope of the road, and it doesn't feel like community space at that point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm tending to be in agreement with all of staff's recommendations, other than redoing the half-cut bowl common area. I think it's kind of a unique, I don't know, it's different, and I'd like to see what can be done with it, the way that they have planned.
I had a couple of other comments. I agree with a lot of what I think Alice said about, needing to look at this area in a map. It seems to me that we all know that our map just hasn't caught up with the reality on the ground. This is a residential area now. That is the land use now. There's a large subdivision next door. We have recently approved numerous other residential projects in the Jennings Mill area, Melwood and other stuff. So the map just hasn't caught up with it. And I agree that long-term or immediately, whenever, we need to look at this in our planning process to ratify what has already been happening on the ground. With respect to this project, I think I take the economic development people at their word that there's no EI development that's going to happen in this corridor. I think this is a good project, and I think Athens just desperately needs housing. And so my inclination is to support it with some version of staff's conditions, which I think are important and good. And I haven't heard the applicant say they have a problem with that. And on the, it sounds like on the utilities front, the mayor and commission may have resource allocation decisions to make about do they want to put money into the McNutt's Creek sewer main? And that's really not our purview. That's for the mayor and commission to decide. And so if they need more capacity out there, the mayor and commission will decide how to spend Athens-Clarke County's resources on improving the sewer that's needed. But given our desperate need for housing, which I think everyone in this group knows about very well,
Nation into some further.
I like the project. I like where it sits on this, because looking at this area, area of land, I think it is going to turn more residential. I always hear the comments about the flyover, and I always look at that and I'm like, well, how much more residential land do we have to take on the other side to make that road fit, you know? So I don't know if that flyover was just a big picture dream or what that was years ago from DOT, but I like how this project looks. My only concern is, as Sarah brought up, is the retaining wall. If they did the 4 feet, how much room then before you go to the next 4? Because I believe it was 15 at the highest spot, 17 at the highest spot. So it would drastically cut into the green space there by doing that. So because how much, if you go up 4, you have to come across 4 before you go back up 4. So you're essentially doing away with the common area. But if it stays at the 17, then there's a fence required or something at the top along those lines to protect on that nature. So I'm inclined to, to approve with some form of the recommendations from staff. The only one that I would have issue with would be the 4-foot terrace walls, only because it takes away from the whole purpose of the common area of what we were trying to build, a park or build something for the kids to enjoy. But if you're going 4, down 4, 4, you're basically cutting way into that and allowing very little common area for what could be there. So I do like the project and do speak for it.
I'm wondering if anyone, staff or other commissioner, can help understand the retaining wall, like exact locations, because I don't really see them on the map. Is it the?
They're up on them.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you.
See the stairs.
Yeah.
And that's on your.
This is very subtly lit, but it does say retaining wall.
There's also 2 other areas.
Trying to imagine it from walking along that street. So say you were walking into the main entrance, could kind of go.
You're gonna be on top of the wall,
Okay.
looking down into the open space, into the green space.
Okay.
And then is it true that the green space there is a bowl and there's also a wall that goes up to the townhomes
It
that
goes
are.
up to the townhome. So if you're in that far right-hand side of the green space, you've got a wall that circles around you. So the stairs inside the green space going to the townhouses on top are going up. And the stairs that you see, the series of stairs there at the far right side are going down. Okay, yes.
And it's not a bowl all the way around. It's like a curve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really flat. It's what's going on, but everything around it has a big slope. So you cut back into the hill to create a flat lawn.
Just a question for the applicant. Why not just bring dirt in and raise the whole thing up at least the 3 or 4 feet?
Well, because you're at grade once you get over to where the clubhouse is. The wall isn't that high the whole way. The road slopes up like this, and we're cutting back like this. So I mean, you're at grade at this end. So for you to fill all that in, you're then creating a sloped lawn area as well.
I guess kind of pictured as a backboard, as a side of a skating ramp on one side, and the bottom is flat.
There's too much grade change from the right side of this property to the left. And so the road is not crazy steep, but it's pretty steep. And if you were to follow that out across the lawn, then the lawn's really too steep to enjoy. So we're just cutting that back into the hill. But we're at grade once we get over to the playground and clubhouse.
question. If we don't make this binding, I'm wondering what's to prevent designs like, the double garage fronted townhomes that we just saw. Is there any kind of restriction in our development regulations?
They could do that with the binding site plan though, right? The elevations are not currently good.
The only,
It's on the site plan, okay.
the only thing that would restrict the design, if you adopted with the conditions we're recommending, would be the road going from one side to the other. That would dictate layout for the overall development. So if they came back and decided they were instead going to do a traditional multifamily project, it would be a multifamily project with a public road.
In this position indicated.
You make just the elevations binding. Got some architecture work that I think is that I like. Okay.
You could, but it's, that's the one component that they were asking not to be binding, so.
Well, can I comment on that, Brian?
Yes.
It has been that is the intent for that. That's the architecture these guys intended to put in place. The reason we did not necessarily offer it as binding is because we may be off a foot on an elevation on one of them. We don't want to get into an issue. We go into permitting and we're 95% that, but we're not 100% that, because a lot of that doesn't come out until the actual site plans get finalized. And then we're coming back to you guys for a modification of a zoning. But I mean, that's not just something we're offering up. I mean, that's what they're going to build. That it's every intent is to build that. So we're fine with it being binding as long as we can work with, grade elevations and that kind of stuff. That doesn't typically work that way.
So with room for adjustment.
Sorry, were you done? Okay, Joey.
I'd like to make a motion to approve with staff recommendations A, B, D, and E.
Second.
You gotta do the land use first.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
right.
A motion to approve the proposed land use change.
Second.
Gary,
Yes.
Goodrum,
No. Abstain.
abstain?
Yeah.
Kinman,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
pass.
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
motion passes.
Now I'd make a motion to approve with staff recommendations A, B, D, and E.
Second.
What were those, what?
A,
number?
B, D, and E.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I think it could turn into I trust the applicant, but just because this is an official vote, I would much rather have those architectural elevations binding, and that would be my only hesitation.
You
I
want
might
to
get
offer
this.
that as a friendly amendment or?
Know how I'd word that.
I ask Brad just as.
Don't I have to accept that?
Yeah.
Of order. Is that proper procedurally, and also is there a way that the flexibility that about if it's off a foot that the applicant's.
I mean, if it's off a foot here or there, those cut changes, we've got that flexibility. Staff, procedurally, it's good room would have to request the maker of the motion as to whether or not they're willing to accept it, and it sounds like he is not.
Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Gary,
Yes.
Goodrum,
No.
Kinman,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Pass,
Yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to the next item on the agenda under new business, item 1, 555 Prince Avenue. Zone -2023-01-0031.
You took my title slide for me, so let's go on to the request. The applicant has requested to rezone the site from institutional to a split zoning of commercial office and mixed density residential. I believe that's actually RM2, not RM1. The applicant is the Clarke County School District. They would take, and we'll show you where these buildings are, but they're taking two existing buildings, splitting them off onto individual parcels, and then in preparation for selling them. The rezone request matches the adjacent zoning exactly. CO is what's on the adjacent, RM2 is what's on the adjacent. There's no new construction here. They're just rezoning these buildings in preparation for sale. This is the site from the aerial view. You can see Prince Avenue runs right through here. This is their school headquarters, formerly Piedmont College, the Athens campus here, and before that, Prince Avenue Baptist Church. We can zoom in on the next parcel. And you can see it's these two buildings right here that they're proposing to split off and sell. This building over here is not part of this proposal, although they have some plans for that building as well. There's no need to change the future land use here. It's Main Street business. So you can see that we've drawn the lines here to represent the new parcels. Those would remain Main Street business because that's what's compatible with the zoning request. Zoning request here, again, we're taking it from institutional to commercial office on the front along Prince, which is what everything else along Prince is on that section. And then RM2 on the back, which is residential. The neighborhood is part of a historic district. These parcels would not be part of the historic district unless their new owners asked to be included, which they could do. This is the building that fronts on Prince, nice historic building. Same thing, this is the building that's on Hill, more of a residence. The application is consistent with our future land use, consistent with our zoning map, consistent with the neighborhood comprehensive plan. We like seeing the opportunity here to reuse a historic structures for residential and commercial purposes, adding additional life to this vibrant neighborhood. These structures are currently empty right now, so it would be a benefit to the neighborhood potentially to get these back on the tax rolls and back to being productively used. And so we're recommending approval of the zoning request.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the auditorium who wishes to speak in favor of this? I'm sorry, we will now hear from the applicant.
My name's John Gilbert. I'm Director of Facility Planning and Construction for Clarke County School District. I'm just here to answer any questions. I don't have a presentation or anything.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the auditorium who wishes to speak in favor of the project? Is there anyone here to speak against the project? We'll bring it behind the rail. Alex.
I'm just going to go ahead and jump out of the gate here because this just seems so no-brainer to me. I'd like to make a motion to approve the request to change the zoning from industrial to commercial office in RM2.
Second.
Any discussion? Sarah.
I was just gonna say, wouldn't it be funny if it was denied? I guess my comment is that if the Athens-Clarke County government wants to prevent this rezoning so that they can call dibs on the use of this building, then that's they can talk about that at the next vote. But it seems like a good idea to me.
I'm just wondering if there are any implications for the preservation of the buildings, because I would love to see them protected from demolition. Does anyone have any insights on that?
I think with them looking to just simply put them back on the market and sell them. Now, whether or not the two owners wanted to request to be moved into the existing local historic district, that certainly would be their prerogative, but.
So to clarify that, is the only way that the buildings could be added to the historic district is by the new owner's request? Or
No,
the county?
the county could do it too. The issue with adding, which is why you oftentimes see small districts next to each other, is that you can't just do a district amendment to pull in two. It requires that you open up the entire thing, the entire existing district for reconsideration. Got to do new survey work on all of it. So it's, a lot of times people will come in and simply, well, instead of trying to have us join District X, we'll just do District Y that's small and adjacent. But in this case, I think that would certainly be unlikely for a two-lot new district.
The existing owner, the Clark County School District, could request inclusion in the historic district? Or the new owner could?
The new owner could, yes.
But I mean, the old owner, the current owner could as well, if the county wanted to condition approval on the district requesting those buildings be added to the historic district.
I'd be hesitant to encourage you to add a condition. I mean, a condition for somebody to ask is really not a condition in the first place. And just, I would not think that the school district would be interested in pursuing that at this point due to the amount of time that it would take. It could be a year or two to get through the designation process.
Okay.
Just to clarify that this is a big step down from actual local historic designation, but presumably if someone were to put in a demolition permit, this would trigger the contacting the commissioners. And so there would be at least there would be some public notification that that was intended. Yes. So for what that's worth, it's not prevention or preservation, but it does give an opportunity for a little more intervention.
Yes, it would. And I would also think, given the size of the lots that are being created, put them on to remove them, especially in the R2, you're going to be dealing with whatever you build back new, it's got to meet density. It's a little bitty lot. It's not going to be a windfall to tear that house down and try to do multifamily.
It goes like a third of an acre or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Does that apply for the other lot too?
Well, the other lot, going to commercial office would have to go to a commercial use. It could not, unless it was a mixed use building. They could do ground floor commercial office with 16 beds per acre over the top. It's a mixed use conversion of the existing building.
Do you have a sense of whether there'd be an incentive to demolish and build something a little bigger, or would it be about the same size?
I don't know how you could build anything. Once you've demolished it, you're having to meet lot coverage requirements, parking, all of those things that I think it's a huge disincentive to take them down.
Great.
Yeah, it's 2/10 of an acre.
Yeah.
And no one's going to pay $900,000 for that. Any further discussion of the ending motion? Shall we have a roll call?
Can I get who made the motion?
That's made it.
Alice, Joey.
Right. Gary,
Yes.
Goodrum,
Yes.
Hinman,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Pass. Yes. And Tucker.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
That brings us to other business. The acting chair has no chair's report.
Okay. I've got three things, director's report. Quickly, I introduced, I talked to you about him in our gym setting, but just formally on the record, welcome back, Mark Pichuk, who has become our comprehensive planning coordinator. And as I said earlier, you'll start seeing Mark along with Stephen take a much more active role with you directly. I'll still be here. I may start looking to that table for questions to be answered and things like that. It's on a day-to-day basis. They're going to be the ones much more involved with this than me. So we are glad to get him back from Covington. Tuesday night's commission action, the New Bridge Road rezoning was tabled until the May vote, and the Bray Street rezoning was approved unanimously. And then just one other note, most of y'all may have seen this, but in case you didn't, there was an announcement made at the commission meeting Tuesday night and then by the governor on a Wednesday regarding a new industry that's coming to Athens. It's known as Meisner. They make medical and pharmaceutical filtration devices that are sold all over the world. Their main plant is in Camarillo, California. And they also have a second plant in Dublin, Ireland, I believe. And so they were looking for a eastern site to build a third plant. And I believe it came down to Athens and Charleston, and Athens won. So this is back when y'all were dealing with the rush on the Christian property out on Spring Valley Road and the rezoning. This was all the behind the scenes stuff that none of us knew about that was already being looked at. So it is going out on that 270 acres on Spring Valley. And employees, 1,700 employees, average salary, 85,000 a year. And it's about a $250 million investment for the county. So by then, so we're super excited to get started with that. And it sounds like they're excited to be here.
Good news.
And that's all I have.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Hey.
You're adjourned.